Welcome back. Medical assistance in dying, or MAID, is back in the spotlight this week. MAID was supposed to be expanded to people who suffer from mental illness next month, but the feds have now tabled legislation proposing to extend that deadline by 3 years, effectively pushing the expansion past the next election. Ministers responsible say it's about readiness. Most provinces say they aren't ready, and a parliamentary committee concluded the same. But advocates say the extension is prolonging unnecessary suffering for a group of people who are already stigmatized for their illness. Arif Virani is the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Hi, Minister. Good to have you on the show. Thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Minister, was the decision to extend MAID's expansion 3 years a political one to push it past the next election, or do you have evidence that will take exactly that time for the country to be ready?
Categorically not. This has never been a political issue as such. Since we've been addressing the issue of medical assistance in dying since we first formed government, we've always taken an approach that's informed by people's moral, conscious decisions in the House of Commons. You've seen a number of free votes on it, and it's been informed by this basic idea of calibrating two ideas. How do you respect the dignity and the autonomy of an individual? And at the same time, how do you ensure that there are safeguards and protections that are put in place into a system to protect those who are vulnerable? That's been our approach all along, and that remains our approach now. The decision that we've taken to put a pause on this issue about mental illness as a sole condition has been informed by what we heard unanimously from both the people that lead the healthcare systems around the country, but also the healthcare professionals that are responsible for delivering MAID, so the nurses, doctors, and psychiatrists who spoke to us resoundingly, saying we need to put a pause to ensure that the system is ready, because it is not right now.
On the former, the people who lead those healthcare systems across the province, from the interviews I conducted over the last week, in particular out of Ontario, or from my reading of the letter that they sent your counterpart, Minister Holland, they didn't define exactly when they will be ready or how they will be ready. In fact, they said that they wanted an indefinite pause. So how will you judge readiness?
So we'll look at a few different indicia, and I know that, for example, Vashti, just on that last point, that there are people even in the House of Commons that are calling for an indefinite pause, and that includes the official opposition. There are people that want this to happen tomorrow, and there is our governmental response, which is that we are not saying yes right now, we're not saying never, we're saying yes in the future when the system is ready. How we will gauge the system readiness is that we will go back to, as the legislation suggests, if it passes, the legislation calls for a reconvening of the committee to look at system readiness sort of 2 years out from now, with a view to 3 years from now, we would be ready to actually proceed in this manner. And I'll give you a tangible example. We've had a lot of work in the healthcare system to develop curriculum for MAID providers so that they know about what the safeguards are and need to be, how to evaluate the circumstances of someone who's presenting with mental illness as a sole condition. That curriculum is developed, but the take-up, the actual utilization of that curriculum has not been very robust to this point.
My understanding, however, from the dissenting opinion to the parliamentary committee is that the same portion of doctors outside of psychiatry, for example, or those who would be assessing mental illness in the other areas to which MAID is already applicable, the uptake is about the same, in line at around 2%. So are you sure that that evidence is really going to be a metric by which you can judge readiness? And if it is, couldn't you already say that the country was ready?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point, Vashti, and it's a little bit detailed, your question, but we originally had one track, which was a reasonably foreseeable death for ease of language, someone who's terminal. About 96% of the Canadians that are accessing MAID right now are still in that category of having a terminal illness. About 3.5% are not. So their death is not reasonably foreseeable, but they otherwise meet the conditions. So that's what you're referring to. It's a small cohort. We anticipate at the time such that mental illness as a sole underlying condition becomes available in Canada 3 years hence, it will remain a very small cohort of people that meet the required conditions. But we heard not once, but twice from that joint committee of MPs and senators that among the testimony that they received, the vast majority of that testimony indicated the systems are not ready.
I certainly understand that point, but when I spoke with Ontario's health minister, she didn't give any indication that she was going to prime her province to ever be ready. She did not think that your government's focus should at all be on MAID. If other provinces are also not willing to become ready, are you going to further delay the legislation?
Well, Vashi,
Or
I
not
can
the
only
legislation, the expansion, pardon me.
Yeah, I can speak to you in terms of where we are right now. Where we are now in February 2024 is that we understand from hearing that evidence that the system is not ready. Certainly, by saying that we're putting a sunset clause 3 years hence, what we're trying to do is incentivize that system readiness. There's a component to that in terms of our response. And I think it's important to understand that when we're trying to indicate, and Minister Holland has said this, and I'll say this again right now, we understand that people are suffering with mental illness. We understand that that mental illness suffering can be exactly equivalent to physical suffering. And we want to have, and have always strived to have, a compassionate response to that suffering. That's really, really important. We expect the provinces and the territories to be adopting the same approach and to be working on their system readiness.
I take your point, but Minister, my point that I'm putting forward to you is not just invented, right? It's what the minister told me in an interview. She was, and I went back and forth many times, but she was pretty clear that there are not efforts underway, nor does she intend for them to be in Ontario to become ready. There are other premiers across this province, across this country, pardon me, who take a similar view. My question is pretty simple. What are you prepared to do to make sure they are ready, or are we going to face the same situation in 3 years where you have to further extend this expansion? And those people who do suffer from that condition, those conditions that you outline, will continue to suffer.
So what I'd say to you, Vashi, is as I've indicated, we have put in place over the course of the entire duration in which medical assistance in dying has been legislated in this country, so dating from 2016, we've put in place a system that we believe calibrates the importance of giving people dignity and autonomy, but at the same time implementing safeguards and protections that protect those who are vulnerable. That's critical. At the same time, when it comes to areas of expansion, we've always looked to both study the areas. We can talk about mature minors, advanced directives, people with mental illness as a sole underlying condition. We've had reports and a lot of in-depth analysis of potential areas of expansion. But we've always proceeded, because we're dealing with healthcare delivery that is delivered by the provinces themselves, we proceeded in tandem with the provinces. That's fundamental. In terms of incentivizing behavior on the part of the provinces so that they're getting to the point where they have the robust response that's prepared, what we're doing is working collaboratively with them.
With great respect, Minister, the provinces had the whole last year because you had signaled that the deadline would be the middle of March, and they are not, as you have decided, ready. Beyond working collaboratively with them, I don't hear anything in your answer that would ensure that they are ready in 3 years.
So Vashi, what I'm indicating to you is that I think you're assuming a situation where the provinces are not taking any steps whatsoever, and I think that's not what we've seen. I think we've seen quite accurately from the testimony before the Joint Committee, not once but twice, that provinces are taking steps, the healthcare profession is taking steps, nurses, psychiatrists, doctors who deliver MAID are definitely taking steps. Curriculum has been devised, and the curriculum needs to be taken up.
Minister, I'm out of time. I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vashi.
When we